I want to talk to you tonight about the state of the state, and then I want to talk about you. And I think one of the reasons they ask me here is because I try to be brief. But the state of the state is this. In Black Hawk County, on the 4th floor of the recently constructed jail, there's one floor that's reserved for those who suffer from mental difficulties. And in one particular cell, there's a fellow whom they bring orange juice and breakfast to in the morning. And he drinks his orange juice. And approximately 2 hours later, he pees in a cup. And then he drinks it again, thinking he's drinking his orange juice. That's just one of his many imbalances. They send him down to Oakdale, and they certify that he's competent to stand trial, and they're always minor offenses. He does his time. They put him back on the street. And 2 or 3 weeks later, he's back in that jail cell drinking his orange juice in a revolving door. I talked to Dennis Kuchera, Tama County Sheriff. When a person is committed for mental illness, not because they've committed a crime, they go to the county jail. And the first thing that happens is that the county jail, they're confined there while they await for a hearing, which rarely happens, or placement in a mental health facility. Dennis calls what's called the point of contact, or the POC. The point of contact has one for each regional mental health center in Iowa. And they start calling around trying to find a place where they can put that individual who needs mental assistance. The counties in the southern 2 tiers of Iowa don't even bother to call Iowa mental health facilities because there are no beds available. They call and place them in Missouri. Dennis is likely to drive all over the state to try to transport one patient to a mental health at the cost of the county. First, of housing the individual, and then second, trying to find a bed someplace that'll take him. In Black Hawk County, we have 21 what are called pediatric beds. Pediatric beds are beds for kids, teenagers, 11 and above. 21 for a population of 125,000. There were 15 at the Mental Health Institute at Independence, but unfortunately, they quit accepting patients. And when they quit accepting patients, Mr. Palmer, the head of the DHS, said, well, that's okay. They're not being used. We don't need them, and they closed them. If you go into an emergency room of a hospital, you'll find patients coming in on acute psychosis, hard episodes that require immediate hospitalization for stabilization. There are 21 beds in one hospital and 20 in the other. You get them into acute, you get them through the emergency room, you get them upstairs, you're allowed to keep them for 5 or 6 days, and then you have to place them. And there's no place to place them. So they go back on the street, and 2 or 3 weeks later, they're back at the emergency room. In fact, the hospitals are so overcrowded, they now keep people in what they call the EDs, emergency department, which means just off the emergency room. And this is happening all over the state, in every county. And it's happening not just to the person who is mentally afflicted, it's happening to the parents, it's happening to the loved ones, it's happening to the wives, it's happening to the husbands of people that are placed in those mental health institutions. And I have yet to hear one candidate running for the legislature talking about that issue. I've yet to hear a combined response from the Iowa Democratic Party or anyone else about that issue. Let me tell you something else. I'm serious tonight. There's 560,000 people on Medicaid. 560,000 that have now been subject to the governor's decision to privatize it. Now, Liz Mathis knows about this. Amanda Reagan knows about this. But publicly, we're not talking about it. Because it's not 560,000 Iowans that are going to be impacted by these cutbacks, by this diminishment in services, by these new hoops that they're going to have to jump into, by the health care providers that have to wait for reimbursement because the MCOs, the managed healthcare organizations, aren't paying. It's all the friends and family and loved ones of the people that are on Medicaid that are also being impacted. And we haven't raised that as an issue. We haven't raised successfully and collectively and repetitively the diminishment of funding to our public schools that have been trying to live on 1.5 to 2.5 educational funding when they need 4.5 just to stay even. The state was founded in 1846. That's 170 years ago. For 170 years, we've relied on voluntary compliance to clean up our water. The governor's proposal was to take money from educational infrastructure funding and put a small smidgen of money out there and say that's going to be my initiative to clean up the water. And clean water is another burning issue. The reason I raise these things tonight is for this, because I saw a couple of the brochures of a couple of our candidates for the legislature. And the brag on it was, listen, I helped the governor enact the largest tax cut on property and business in the history of the state of Iowa. That was the first reason we should send that Democrat back to the legislature. The second reason we should have is because he helped the governor cut the tax on business equipment by $27 million. The third was he was going to monitor privatization. And the fourth was that he supported education, and who the hell doesn't? But how do you support it? And the thing that struck me, and the reason I accepted your invitation tonight, and I'm sorry if I'm off track because I'm supposed to be praiseworthy, but the thing that struck me was I remember when we were in Ames last year and we had 52 groups together, and I thought it was one of the best economic summits, working family summits I've seen. And I just don't know why we don't take that and take those issues. When I talk to some people, they say, well, our polls don't show that. I don't care. The polls won't show anything if we don't start talking about it. Now you can say, well, but the governor isn't on the ballot. And I say, as politely as I can, in my own modest way, put his butt on the ballot by putting his policies on the ballot. Let the people know that if they vote for a Republican, they're voting for Governor Branstad's policies. If you like the situation with the privatization of Medicaid, and I don't know anyone that does, if you like the disaster that we've created, we're 49th now in the nation in terms of mental health beds available per population. If you like the cutbacks in school funding and the transfer of public education to the private sector for those who can afford it, then you should vote Republican. It ought to be a unified, redundant message that we launch. You know what we're becoming in this state, and it's not because we've acquiesced in it or because we've gone along with it. But if we're honest with each other, what's happening to this state is we are becoming Kansas Light, the modified version. I watched in Louisiana the other day, they announced that they'd given away 200 more to business than they'd collected in revenue. And Louisiana State University is now in bankruptcy. The prestige capital flagship university of the state of Louisiana is in bankruptcy because of tax cuts and giveaways. But that's what we've done here, and that's what they've done in Wisconsin. And I think if we want to follow Mr. Loebsack's suggestion, Congressman Loebsack's suggestion, which I think is a good one, I think the key to that is to start the revolution now by capturing the legislature, by being bold enough to go out there and repetitively state in every district that we can confront that the way the Democrats gain control of the legislature is let people know that when a Republican stands on the ballot, he stands right alongside Terry Branstad, and a vote for him is a vote for Terry's policies. And if we do that, I'm absolutely convinced that we can have the political revolution that we're looking to undertake these 2 years, and we can move forward and capture the governorship in 2 more years beyond that. But we've got to do it together. We can't be afraid. We can't be timid. That's the political portion of the speech, and that's how I feel. Now, I want to talk about you, and permit me to give my credentials to do that. I said when I started that I sat in a union hall in 1972. I was the county chair of the Blackhawk County Democrats, a prestigious and important position of achievement. I was convinced. I was 31 years old and wondered what I was going to do with my political future after I relinquished all that power. And I went out, though, we had an election to win, and I went out and I saw Jack Sieber of the UAW Hall and Lyle Taylor of the Meat Cutters. And we talked and we visited and we put the resources together and we won, and we did the same thing again in 1974. In 1982, I became chair of the Iowa Democratic Party. And we worked very hard, and together with labor, we captured control of both the Iowa House and the Iowa Senate. And when the election was over in early in 1983, I called up Wengert and Roan and Smith on a Friday afternoon, and I said, let's go have lunch. And so we went to have lunch. I don't know if any of you have ever been on those lunches. I remember getting back to the headquarters. I'm not quite sure how I got there. But they said to me, they said, what do you want? And I said to them, I said, no, we won the election. What do you want? And they said, you're the first chair that's ever come out here and asked us that question. But that was my philosophy, that if we won, they won. If they win, we win. And we did that in 1982. We did that in 1984. In 1986, I was elected to the Congress of the United States. The day after the election, John Deere was on strike. People said, don't go there. You won't win re-election. I went there, stood on the picket line with the strikers of John Deere. The United States elected congressman standing in a picket line. That wasn't supposed to be done, but I did it. In 1988, there was a plant in Marshalltown called Monford's. They took $3 million from the community to build a new plant and expand it. You remember this. Promised they'd keep their workers. 2 weeks after the plant was opened, they held an announcement. All workers were fired, new workers would be brought in, and the old workers would be permitted to apply for a new position at a lower wage. In 1934, they elected a Democrat to Congress. When I was elected in 1986, it was the second time since 1846, and no Democrat, and there'd only been two of us, had ever been reelected. And once again, they said, don't get involved with it. I even met in Waterloo with the leadership of the State Federation of Labor, and they said, don't get involved with it, you can't win it. And I got involved in it. And I was kind enough to get the support of Neil Smith and Tom Harkin and the rest of the Iowa congressional delegation. I discovered that ConAg, this story hasn't been told before, but I discovered that ConAg, which owns Monford, got about $400 million a year at that time from the Agricultural Committee. I discovered that I was on the Agricultural Committee. I had a meeting with ConAg. I told them that I felt that their appropriations might be in difficulty unless there was a resolution of my plant in Marshalltown, Iowa. And one day later, an amazing thing happened. The strike was called off. The workers were issued a new 3-year contract with a raise each year. I'm kind of proud of that one. When I was rudely interrupted by an election and terminated my tenure in Congress, Mark Smith said, and I had no reason to doubt him, that I had the highest labor voting record in the history of the Iowa congressional delegation. And I'm proud of that. Now, I don't tell you those things to lay words on myself. I was taught when I grew up not to brag. But I say that in the framework and the context of my association with you through the years, and frankly, my observations of you. Now, it is customary to come in here and say that the labor movement we would not have without the labor movement, the 40-hour work week, overtime pay, OSHA, and all the other benefits, collective bargaining, public collective bargaining. And all those things are true, that we would not have without the labor movement. Though those things are maintained by the people in this room, it doesn't necessarily mean that we actually did them ourselves. They were done before by our forefathers. But I remembered I was reading, don't ask me why, I was reading about the March on Washington by the Bonus Army in 1924. After the First World War, we'd promised veterans a bunch of bonuses, and then the government had, this surprised you, the government had reneged on the promise. And so there was outpouring of veterans from across the country to send on Washington asking for their bonus. The head of that, Walter W. Waters, said that he said of his group, "You speak for the inarticulate masses of humanity." You speak for the inarticulate masses of humanity. The thing that has always struck me about the labor movement is that you've never confined yourself simply to labor issues, but you've broadened yourself beyond that. Each of you individually are, in my judgment, what Bob Kennedy called the highest form of citizenship. You're the people, and the people basically of this country are the ones that buy their houses, they raise their families, they guide their children, they take care of their parents in old age, they pay their taxes, they support their community, they engage in charitable endeavors. Kennedy called that the highest form of public service. And whether they belong to a labor union or not, those are the people that you consistently speak for beyond the borders of the confines of your own self-interest. You, for example, hear the language that's being said in the presidential campaign about foreigners, about rapists from foreign countries, about Muslims, about terrorists, and you don't respond. Remind me of what Clarence Darrow said. He was an attorney in Chicago of great fame. He fought the battle, or he had the trial with the Scopes Monkey trial with William Jennings Bryan. But one time he was in Chicago, he was arguing for the life of two lads that were sentenced to be executed. And he said, when we realize that cruelty simply breeds cruelty, that hatred only causes hatred, that is, there is anything to kill evil and hatred and all that goes with it, it is not more evil than hatred, but it's love and understanding and charity. And that's the spirit of which you've operated your organization. You don't care about ethnicity, you don't care about religion, you don't care about the sex of a person. You care about the quality of life that you can create for them, and that transcends just labor issues, or you wouldn't be standing for the Clean Water Act and its renewal, or the Clean Air Act, or all the host of other things that we have to confront and have to move forward. So when I come here tonight, I come with one common message for you. When you leave here, I want you to stand a little taller. I want you to walk with your shoulders back. I want you to take some pride, because you are truly a special chorus of people that reach beyond yourselves and reach for the betterment of all of us. I thought Bob Kennedy, in his closing remarks, would look and he'd say, as George Bernard Shaw, a British playwright, would say, and people, the boys on the bus, at that time only boys, the press would say, hit the buses because he's getting done. But Kennedy would say, George Bernard said, some men see things as they are and ask why, and other people see things that never were and ask why not. The labor movement, to me, is the organization that asks the question continually and perpetually for the betterment of the inarticulate masses of humanity, asks the question, why not? George Wendell Holmes, Oliver Wendell Holmes, the justice, once was asked to speak at his retirement. He was 90 years old. He quoted a Latin poet from ancient Rome. The poet said that death plucks at our ear and says, live, for I am coming. And I would say to you, keep doing what you're doing. Live long, live well, and continue to take pride in what you've done and what you're doing, because you asked Kennedy's question, why not? Thank you very much for having me here tonight.